Hello, Michael.
Hello.
Today's question says, in what sense is the search or need for further explanations other than the simple and plain truth less mature, spiritually speaking? Is the acceptance and gradual refining and understanding of the most simple principles combined with the practice brought about in the mind by grace in the form of clearer insights into what the nature of the path is really about?
When we first come to Bhagavan's path, when we first read his teachings, we will each have so many ideas and beliefs that we picked up in the course of our life. So Bhagavan's teachings are offering us a radically different view of everything. So if we are attracted to Bhagavan's teachings, we will try and understand them and relate them to all that we know and that we experience. The more clearly we understand Bhagavan's teaching, the more we will recognize that we have to give up our old ideas. But still, even when we're learning new ideas, that is, the basic principles of Bhagavan's teachings are very, very simple. But what Bhagavan has taught us, for example, particularly if we, not so much in Bhagavan's main works, though it's there to some extent in Bhagavan's main works, but if we read recordings of conversations and everything, people who came and asked Bhagavan questions, they all came from certain backgrounds. And a lot of the people who came to Bhagavan already had at least some familiarity with Vedanta philosophy. So according to the needs of individuals, Bhagavan sometimes gave that is in a, well, I'm not leaving aside, I mean, Vedanta is vast because there are so many different forms of Vedanta. Let's focus on Advaita Vedanta. Even within Advaita Vedanta, there are many different levels of explanation to suit people of different levels of spiritual maturity. So, for example, I mean, the essence of Advaita is extremely simple, but to make it palatable to people, it's often presented in a rather diluted manner. That is, there's a whole, there are a lot of elaborate explanations about creation, how creation comes into being. This is according to the Shrishti Drishti view. And all about Maya and Aravana Shakti and Vikshepa Shakti, all these, so many different, so many more complicated explanations are there. Bhagavan often used to talk in those terms when appropriate according to the needs of people. So people came with already some background in understanding in Advaita, I mean, if I'd already read some Advaita texts and so on, he would often give explanations to suit their level of spiritual development. So at first, when we first come to Bhagavan, we may pick up a lot of concepts that at first they seem, yes, this is a very nice way of explaining it. This is very meaningful. But later on, as we go deeper into Bhagavan's teachings, we see that a lot of those explanations, particularly the more traditional type of explanations, actually they're superfluous. Either they're explaining things that don't actually need explaining, because what we need clarity on is the practice above all else. And a lot of these more elaborate explanations, they actually, though they're useful at a certain stage, they just tend to complicate the matter unnecessarily. I mean, later on, we'll view them as unnecessarily complicating what is very simple. So the general trend of our understanding first we have to begin to question and jettison our old ideas. And we pick up a lot of new ideas because of the whole context of Advaita philosophy. But even a lot of the ideas within Advaita philosophy, as we go deeper in the path, we find a lot of these ideas are really not so very useful. They may be satisfied they may be useful for answering more superficial questions, but when we go deeper, they become superfluous because the more superficial questions become irrelevant to us. The questions that seem very relevant at first, later on are found to be irrelevant. So the general trend, if we're truly following Bhagavan's path, our understanding will tend to become simpler as we go on. And a simpler understanding is a clearer understanding. That is, we'll have less questions. We'll recognize a lot of the questions we may have had in the past, though answers can be given to those questions, the questions themselves are unnecessary. We really don't need to. I mean, if you study Advaita Vedanta from traditional teachers, you will learn so much, so many ideas, so many analogies, so many explanations of different kinds, which maybe seem very useful at first, but as we go deeper, a lot of these things become unnecessary distractions. So one sign that we are going deeper in the practice and that we're becoming more focused on the core of Bhagavan's teachings is when we lose a taste in the more elaborate explanations and we are attracted to the simpler explanations. And also when we begin to recognize that a lot of the questions that we may have asked in the past are really irrelevant. For example, one question that people often ask at first: why does ego come into existence? Why does how did Maya arise? Why is there Maya? All these sort of questions. There are so many ways these things can be explained, but ultimately, as Bhagavan said, we cannot explain these things because if ego actually existed, we could, or if Maya actually existed, we could explain how or why it came into existence. But if we investigate it, we'll find it doesn't actually exist. So looking for answers to how and why is just an unnecessary distraction. Even if people have understood that, people still want to know, okay, the mind subsides in sleep. How does it come out again? So it must exist in some form in sleep, in some seed form. And that's what's generally said. Yes, the mind exists in a seed form, as the karana sarira. That is the usual explanation that is given, and that is useful for satisfying people's curiosity. But when we understand that this mind is actually unreal, even when it seems to exist, why should we posit that it exists in a seed form, even when it doesn't seem to exist? That is, when we're asleep, we're not aware of the mind or ego or any karana sarira or any vasanas or anything. So why should we assume that is the only reason they are said to exist in sleep is to satisfy our curiosity about why the mind rises from sleep? The reason the mind, a much simpler reason, more practical reason can be given. The reason the mind rises from sleep is because it subsided in sleep without being destroyed. Why was it not destroyed? Because it subsided in sleep due to tiredness, or it subsided in nirvikalpa samadhi due to pranayama. None of these things will bring about a permanent dissolution of mind. Mind will remain as if it's dissolved, but it will again pop up again, as Bhagavan says in that 8th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. So the reason the mind is not destroyed is that the only means to destroy the mind is for the mind to attend to itself so keenly that the mind experiences itself as pure awareness. As soon as the mind experiences itself as pure awareness, it ceases to be mind. And it's clear there never was any such thing as mind or ego at all. So that is the only way to bring about the permanent dissolution. If the mind subsides without seeing what it actually is, it will definitely rise again. So we don't have to, that is to say that the mind exists in a seed form is one way of satisfying people's curiosity, but it's not really a very useful way. But to say the mind rises from sleep because because it went into sleep by tiredness or by any means other than keenly focused self-attentiveness, it will definitely rise again. That's a practical solution, because then how do we bring about the permanent cessation? Only by self-attentiveness. So a lot of the explanations which are appropriate to the more superficial questions, they become irrelevant when we see the questions themselves are irrelevant, or we see that actually there's a much deeper and more practical explanation. It may not satisfy the curiosity so much, because how can the mind, if the mind completely ceases to exist in sleep, then how can it rise again? So long as our mind is, so long as we're interested in asking such questions, then it has to say, okay, yes, it exists in a seed form in sleep. But why should we posit that it exists in a seed form when we don't experience that seed form? What we experience in deep sleep is only I am, nothing but I am. When we, from the perspective of the mind, we say, oh, sleep was a state of darkness, it was a state of ignorance, or it was a blank, I wasn't aware of anything. That's all from the perspective of the mind in waking and dream. But actually in sleep, we didn't experience a blank, we didn't experience darkness or anything, we only experienced I am. That's all that actually exists in sleep. That's a much simpler and clearer explanation. We rise because we eat, that is, until the mind or ego is destroyed, it will continue rising. Though it is dissolved completely in sleep, it will continue rising again. And it rises from Nirvikalpa Samadhi for the same reason, because it hasn't been destroyed. Why hasn't it been destroyed? Because we went into that state of laya without attending to ourselves. That is, the mind dissolving by any means other than self-attentiveness will only result in laya. That is, that state of dissolution will only be a temporary dissolution. Therefore, it's what's called laya. To bring about the permanent dissolution, we need to attend to ourselves. So, as I say, the deeper we go in the practice, the more questions that seemed important earlier will seem irrelevant or seem no longer important. And so we'll be able to, our understanding will become simpler and simpler. Because the fewer the questions we have, the fewer the explanations we require. The more explanations, often the explanations, having lots of explanations, doesn't actually help in the practice. So, as I say, the general, as we progress in this path, we will find our understanding becoming simpler and simpler. And along with simplicity comes clarity. That is the simple, it's much easier. That is, something that is simple is very clear. Something that is very complicated is not so clear. If you read the vast volumes that have been written on Advaita philosophy, on how the world was brought into existence, of how many, how the whole thing of gradual creation, God by the power of Maya created this from this, and then these were added together, and this is the Karana level, and then there's a Sukshma level, and then there's a Stula level, and so many different tanmatras and 5 elements and 3 gunas and all these things, lots and lots of elaborate explanations. But how do all these things help us? This is what Bhagavan talks about in the 17th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, when he says, just as one needs to gather up or sweep up and throw away rubbish, just as one who needs to gather up or sweep away, throw away rubbish, would derive no benefit by examining it, so one who needs to know oneself will derive no benefit by, instead of collectively rejecting all the tattvas which are concealing oneself, calculating that they are this many and examining their qualities. Here, Bhagavan is directly referring to many, many Advaita texts that go into elaborate explanations about all these different tattvas, all the different elements and the gunas and the tanmatras and so on and so forth, and how many elements constitute the subtle body consists of 17 parts, and all this is totally unnecessary. That is, we are not here to research for non-self. We are here to research ourself. So whatever is not ourself, we are to reject it. We shouldn't be continuing to analyze it. So if we understand what Bhagavan is saying here, we will understand it's unnecessary to ask questions about anything other than ourselves. So the more we become interested in just knowing and being what we ourselves actually are, the less we will be concerned to ask questions about anything else. And the less questions we have, the less necessary it will be to give elaborate explanations.
Yes.
Does this answer the question or not?
Yeah, sure. I have a couple of more questions about it.
Yes.
But,
yes, please.
Yeah, because I have observed this in myself. I mean, when I had other beliefs from other traditions before, and when I started listening to you and reading Bhagavan more in depth, I little by little started to understand better the text, because when I used to read Bhagavan 10 years ago, I didn't understand anything. I didn't understand anything. So it's not as much as a matter of understanding, but to, as you said, removing all beliefs, or trying to get things more confused than they actually are.
Yes.
For example, one example is the Eka Jiva Bala, for example, or the is connected with Srishti Bala. So in that, I know how I try to make it more complex than it actually is. One ego only.
Yes.
There is only one ego. I mean, there seems to be many people, but only one ego.
Yes.
And then I start wondering, like, okay, but then if so, one ego, but you should have one ego. No, because there's only one ego. Wait, but you have one ego with many people, and I have one ego with many. The mind starts like trying to make it more confusing than it actually is. When you when you explain the dream analogy, and it's so simple.
Yes.
And that's it. Stop. That's it. I mean,
this is why a lot of Advaita philosophy is unnecessarily complicated. We say unnecessarily, but for many people that appeals to them. They like the complexity, because so long as we've got complexity, ego is safe. Ego takes refuge in complexity. What ego doesn't like is absolute simplicity. What is the simplest state of all? One only without a second. That is what Advaita is all about. That is the fundamental principle of Advaita is that there is one only without a second. And what is that one? You are that. So that is all we ultimately, that is all we need to know. So if I am that, then what am I? We turn our attention back to investigate ourselves. That's how a mature mind will take it. But the immature mind will raise endless questions, and to satisfy those immature minds, endless explanations are given.
And you start wondering about if other people are aware, if can there be a second ego within an ego? It's like theories between theories and
yes.
So in a sense, when the ability to like a mature mind will be one that looks for the things that are the mere indicators that are going to lead it to the self. And nothing else. I mean, if knowing the origin of ego is of no use, I'll put that aside because it's of no use.
All we need to know is that the root of all our problems is this ego. This ego is the root problem. And the nature of this ego, it comes into being, rises and thrives by attending to things other than itself. But by attending to itself, it will subside and dissolve back into its source. That's all we need to know. If we've understood that, then turn back within.
Yeah, exactly. It's easy, but just bringing up all these questions, makes the mind like more. I don't know if it's just a matter of in the question it's written that it's grace acting through I don't know, through intellect or in a way that
grace. That is one of the main ways grace works, by giving clarity to our intellect, and that clarity we gain by turning within. By turning within, we gain that clarity. That clarity is is what is otherwise called grace. And in that clarity, then all these so many questions that seem very important to us previously, but we wanted to have answers to our questions, those questions now seem totally irrelevant, superfluous. What does it matter? If we ask questions about things other than ourselves, there is no end to. We can go on for all eternity. This is what science and philosophy and all these other things are doing. That is the natural tendency of the mind is to go outwards. And the more we go outwards, the more things multiply. That is, the more science, for example, the more science investigates the faraway galaxies and things, the more things we find there to know about. That is, previously, when we just looked up and saw a few twinkling stars, our knowledge was very little, and our ignorance was very little, because we didn't know all the things that we didn't know about. But now, as the more we know we don't know. So along with the increase of knowledge is the increase of ignorance. So if we allow the mind to go outwards, it can go on endlessly. Likewise, that's when they investigate the things far away. When they try to go deep into and investigate molecules and then atoms and then neutrons and protons and electrons, but that doesn't explain everything. Then they go finding subtler and subtler quarks and quasars and quantum effects and all these things. It's endless. That is, the more we investigate things other than ourselves, the more things other than ourselves we will find. But there's no end to external research. And the same in philosophy. We can go on philosophizing. There are endless different theories in philosophy from time immemorial. In every culture, they've had philosophies. They've come up with so many ideas. Why there are also so many different theories, so many different views? Because when you're looking outside, the possibilities are infinite. Because the outward going mind, the more we send the mind outwards, the more it creates. The nature of the mind is to create multiplicity. So this is the path. That is the path of pravriti, going outwards. This is the path of nivritti, going inward. Going inwards means going back to the one to whom all this appears. And what is the one behind that one? In other words, what is the reality of ego? What is the reality underlying ego? Ego is one. So this one ego, all this vast universe with all its sciences and its philosophies and its histories and geographies and endless myriad of things that we know, and myriad of things, and still greater myriad of things that we don't know. All these things appear in the view of the outward mind, outward-looking mind. When we turn within, what is actually there is ekam eva advaitam, one only without a second.
Yeah. So, and when Bhagavan says like only jnana is the jnani,
yes,
and devotees want to know, or devotees of Bhagavan or some other
yes,
want to know whether someone is a jnani or not, if it's a real jnani or it's
exactly.
It's like a contradiction. They're not like. I mean, if Bhagavan tells you only jnana is jnani,
they're looking in the wrong direction. Bhagavan is trying to get us to look in the right direction. That's why he says jnana alone is the jnani. In other words, there's only one jnani. And who is that one jnani? You are that. So if you want to find the jnani, look within, don't look outside. Because when you look outside, you see only people. And you think, is this person a jnani or an ajnani? Oh, this person is definitely, Bhagavan, yes, he's definitely a jnani. But these other people, are they jnanis or not?
Yeah.
Some people will say they're jnanis, some people will say they're not jnanis. What does it matter? What Bhagavan has come to tell us, stop looking outside, look at yourself.
Yeah.
No, but Bhagavan said satsang is necessary, so I have to go and find a jnani to. Bhagavan also said, you alone are sat. So if you want satsanga, look at yourself, don't look outside.
Yes, true. And,
so how people, even Bhagavan's teachings, people will easily misinterpret if they are not mature enough to understand. But the whole point of Bhagavan's teaching is turning us within. We need not be concerned about anything else. Let the whole world be full of jnanis. What is it to us? So long as we're in ignorance, any number of jnanis is not going to help us. Any true jnani will only tell us, see yourself. You yourself are the jnani you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. But even it's true that Bhagavan sometimes made concessions to people.
He had to, of course, he had to. Bhagavan often said the teaching has to be according to the taught.
Exactly.
You can't give one teaching to, because most people, Bhagavan's teachings will simply not appeal to them. So it's appropriate. Why there are so many religions, so many different philosophies and things, is to appeal to people at different stages of spiritual growth, spiritual development. And even if Bhagavan insists on sticking to only the core principles of his teachings, people will still misinterpret them. So you have to adapt the teachings according to people's willingness to understand. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. It's not even ability to understand, it's willingness to understand is the thing. Because Bhagavan's teachings are so simple, they can be understood by a child. So it's not that we need to have a great intellect to understand Bhagavan's teaching. We need to have a willingness to be willing to understand things in a very simple way, to view things in a simple way.
So when
and there's no simpler way of viewing everything than the way Bhagavan has taught us. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what it is giving up everything. Verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he says it all.
Yeah, exactly. Bhagavan teaches the purest, it's the most simple teachings, and they're all beliefs. Like there might be someone who says, okay, no, this cannot be. This cannot be what Bhagavan says because I give more value to what I thought, no, what I was told before in other tradition. And someone could say, this makes sense. I automatically will give up the old belief. So I mean that change can be like a willingness to go to the next level, so to speak.
And for most of us, the simplification of our understanding, it happens over time. That is, as I tried to explain earlier, first we in the process of jettisoning our old beliefs, we take on a lot of new beliefs. Beliefs that are within the context of Advaita. But even many of the beliefs taught by Advaita become even those we will begin to jettison as we go deeper. That is because there are different levels of explanation to suit different levels of spiritual growth, we can say, spiritual maturity. As we grow more, our understanding becomes simpler and simpler. And only with simplicity comes clarity.
Definitely. I see it all the time in my job. For example, I teach Spanish to foreigners, and sometimes if I teach, for example, the past tenses and some very simple thing at the beginning, and I give the information, and then 3 people understand in a different way, and I wonder how can they understand 3 different ways when I explain. No, it's impossible. It's then, you wonder how.
Yes.
The knowledge reflects in different directions.
Yes. When that is true, even of worldly things, how much truer it will be of these spiritual things? Because that is, though Bhagavan's teachings are very, very simple, they're also very subtle and very deep. So the mind can easily misinterpret it, view it through its own colored glasses.
Yeah, have to take off our glasses.
Yes. Those glasses are called ego. If we remove the glasses, then we'll see clearly.